Buenos and Hafaday, the Committee on Heritage and the Arts, Parks, Guam Products, Hagåtña Revitalization, Self-Determination, and Regional Affairs now convenes this public hearing. Public hearing notices were given to the media. The first notice was on Wednesday, May 15th, 2019, and the second notice was on Monday, May 20th, the second notice was on Monday, May 20th, 2019. For the record, today is Wednesday, May 22nd, and the time is now 10:10 in the morning. Notices sent out for this morning's confirmation hearing include the following. Confirmation hearing of Carlos Madrid to serve on the Board of the Commissioners, Hagåtña Restoration and Redevelopment Authority. Confirmation hearing of Patricia Ann P. Ada to serve on the Board of Commissioners, Hagåtña Restoration and Redevelopment Authority. Confirmation hearing of Eduardo J. Calvo, to serve on the Board of Commissioners, Hagåtña Restoration and Redevelopment Authority. The confirmation hearing of Patricia Ann P. Ada to serve on the Board of Commissioners for the Hagåtña Restoration and Redevelopment Authority Committee, scheduled for 10:30 a.m., will be postponed and rescheduled to May 30th, 2019. Ms. Ada advised the committee that she is off island. The committee attempted to coordinate today's hearing via video teleconference, which the nominee accepted. However, she is currently in transit and a robust internet connection at the Chuuk Airport could not be located. The committee will continue to accept written testimonies, and in fact, I have one here already on Miss Ada's nomination. Joining me for this public hearing will be Senator Taitano, and I will now go over the general rules for the public hearing. The conduct of this public hearing shall be as follows. Those testifying will be recognized in the order of the sign-up on the sign-in sheet. We may make an exception at the beginning since we do have Mr. Carlos Madrid on teleconference. Written testimony may be read. Lengthy written testimony should be summarized to about 5 minutes. Written testimony shall be submitted to the committee. Please provide our legislative staff with your written testimony for photocopying. Testimony shall be confined to the substance, meaning to the topic of the hearing. Persons will be allowed to present oral testimony only once. Once you are finished, you may be asked to remain in the room for questions or for additional testimony, as may be desired by the members of the panel. When you speak, please make sure that the microphone is on, teleconferencing not included, and that you speak into the microphone. Please state your name for the record before you begin your testimony. So we have here our video teleconference connection with Dr. Carlos Madrid. And so we will make sure that that is properly set up. We will take a momentary recess to set up and establish the video teleconference connection with the first nominee on this morning's agenda, who is currently in Manila. The committee hereby recesses. Yeah. Oh. Okay, so I'm advised that we are ready to proceed. In this case, we will go ahead and hear testimony from Mr. Carlos Madrid via the teleconference. And then we will hear those that are here to provide supportive testimony as well. So with that, Mr. Carlos Madrid, if you would go ahead and state your name, but then also begin your testimony for today.
See you, Master. Buenas and half a day. Honorable Senators, and thank you for facilitating the video conference for this public hearing today. I want to make sure that I'm being heard. Is the sound okay? Yes. Perfect. For me as a professional of history and a cultural advocate, the possibility of participating in the Agaña Redevelopment and Restoration Committee, it's a true honor. It's hard to conceive a more meaningful endeavor for a whole people like in the one of Guam and the Mariana Islands. As is the redevelopment of the capital, not only the historical capital, the modern city of Agaña, but also the ancestral capital of the Chamorro people, or the main place of inhabitants of Guam since before the colonial times. At the same time that this endeavor represents a cultural opportunity for identity, tourism, and cultural promotion, the development of Agaña, it implies the establishment of a strong capital, a government place where all government offices can be concentrated in the same area. And it's this simultaneous set of identities that Agaña will have as a capital, as a historical center, a small business opportunity, and site for historic buildings. It creates the need of a balanced sensitivity in terms of keeping the right equilibrium between all of those layers of identities and priorities and roles that this wonderful capital historically has had. I know this administration is fully determined to take this endeavor to completion. I had happened to interview during my professional career to many of the Manamco that lived during the pre-war years in Agaña, and they all speak highly of this unique city. The possibility that during the lifetime of this generation, Agaña can go fully back to life, it truly it's a challenge, and at the same time an opportunity of service, of which, as I said, I'm truly honored to be able to contribute.
Suzuis Masi, for your testimony, and certainly I've known you a number of years, and so I've known you as a professional historian. I've known you as somebody, whether you were earning your degree elsewhere or here as a resident or a professor at the university, that you were always studying about the Marianas, and specifically you have done some very specific research about Agaña. So
yes,
with that, let me go ahead and also call forth those that have signed up to testify, and then we'll have a few questions for you and possibly those that are testifying in a few minutes.
Sí, just más.
Can I also call forward Rita Nauta and Lacia Casil? So if we can begin with Ms. Rita Nauta, if you can start by stating your name and then going ahead with your oral testimony.
Hafa de buenas, Madam Chair. My name is Rita Nauta. I'm the Managing Director for Guampedia.com, and I'm here to provide oral testimony and support of Carlos Madrid's nomination to the Board of Commissioners for the Hagåtña Restoration and Redevelopment Authority. I was actually quite excited to hear of this appointment the same way that when he was announced as the new Associate Professor of Spanish Pacific History within the Micronesia Area Research Center. Guampedia is an affiliate program of the MARC, so his contributions and his role at MARC will definitely parlay as well into his role as a commissioner on the authority. Particularly because, as Carlos mentioned, his research, his background, the work that he's done is pretty broad, especially spanning Micronesia, Spain, and the Philippines. And particularly, his credentials really speak volumes of the qualifications that he brings to the table to serve as a board commissioner, and as well as the areas of research that he's engaged in. It's quite extensive, the wealth of knowledge, perspective, and insight that he can bring to the authority from the Chamorro cultural expressions, human exchanges in Micronesia, cartography. It really has become, cultural heritage preservation is really become a passion of his. And he's been able to cultivate, as part of his professional mission, to foster close ties between Spain, the Philippines, and the Micronesia Islands through collaborative efforts in the humanities and social science. To date, you can access about 16 of Carlos Madrid's research papers in the form of written entries in Guampedia.com. They extend from early European observations of Chamorros to the galleons that have visited Guam's ports, to different types of people profiles. Although 250 years pales in comparison to 3,000 years of our ancient history, that period of Spanish colonization, like in the Philippines and in Mexico, where our ancestors were introduced to new lifeways, foods, and beliefs, our mañana, they made it their own. And it's become a unique part of what is the Marianas, and what we consider today as this hybrid identity of y costumbrin Chamorro, which emerged from this time period and continues to be a big part of our Chamorro identity. And it's very important that we pass this on to our mañatati, our future generations. So in the work of restoring and redeveloping one of Guam's last historic districts, I think Carlos will provide great historical, global, and human context. And I'd like to state for the record a quote from Carlos's latest book, The World of Manila Acapulco Galleons. It's something that is really exciting. Although the book focuses on Mexico and Filipino nations, because Guam was the first site of the Spanish mission in the Pacific, I think the narrative still applies. And Carlos Madrid, who is one of the writers of this book, he, and I quote, "For both Mexican and Filipino nations, the contact of their indigenous cultures with Spain via the galleons created wondrous and sometimes contradictory hybrid cultures that have become the lasting basis of their respective identities and that speak eloquently of their boundless potential for adaptation in a multicultural and globalized 21st century." So his knowledge and passion for this period of history will definitely serve the authority and the people of Guam. Sizus Masi.
Sizus Masi for that very helpful testimony. It really outlined some of the breadth of Dr. Madrid's contributions to our island and the archipelago, and some of the work that he's done. So Sizus Masi for that. The next we'll hear from Ms. Lacia Casil, who is the Executive Director of the Hagåtña Restoration and Redevelopment Authority.
Mananasidu Senator Taitano and Senator Marsh Taitano, thank you for allowing me to come here and speak on behalf of Mr. Carlos Madrid in his nomination to the Hagatna Restoration and Redevelopment Authority Board of Commissioners. For the record, my name is Lacia Casil. I am the Executive Director of the Hagatna Restoration and Redevelopment Authority. I'm here to testify in support of Mr. Carlos Madrid to our Board of Commissioners. Mr. Madrid is an esteemed associate professor and director of the Micronesian Area Research Center. I've heard many things about Mr. Madrid prior to meeting him earlier this year, and I know of some of his works, and it was a real pleasure to finally get to meet him, not just in the workspace, but also outside of the workspace. And I can tell you that his passion for our culture, preserving and promoting it, it's very deep and inspiring. And one of his early contributions, actually, to the Hagatna Restoration and Redevelopment Authority back in 2013 was a presentation on the vernacular architecture of the Marianas Islands, in which he discusses pre-Spanish architecture in Hagatna and what was lost from that time. I'm actually going to ask him to give this presentation again once we're up and going and open up to the public and invite everyone so that we can learn more about pre-Spanish architecture. And I believe that Mr. Madrid's rich background in history will assist us in our mission of restoring the unique sense of place in Hagatna, which is one of our missions, as well as preserving what we have left for future generations. Thank you.
Sejus Masi for that. And if you could just clarify, I just want to make sure that I heard you correctly. When you were saying the presentation of vernacular architecture, from which era or which representation was that?
The title of it is Vernacular Architecture of the Marianas Islands.
Okay,
Yeah.
so perhaps that would be one of the questions I ask Dr. Madrid, is just the breadth of the vernacular architecture that he had covered during that presentation, to understand that better. But Sejus Maasi for your testimony and your support. Again, it's very helpful to hear about that deep passion that he has for the Chamorro culture and understanding our history and so forth. What I will do is I will open this up to Senator Taitano and see if she has comments or questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm looking, it says Carlos Madrid Alvarez Piner. Is it Dr. Carlos Madrid Alvarez Piner?
Yes.
Okay, it didn't. So Dr. Madrid, or do I say Dr. Piner?
You may say Dr. Madrid or
Okay.
Carlos.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm addressing you correctly. So, Dr. Madrid, thank you first for, taking on this position. I know that Hagatna Restoration is been long overdue, number one, and the biggest challenge that they have is funding this project. So first, thank you for doing that, because it is going to be a big project for you. And like I said, 90% is funding. However, your background here, it has you beginning at the Micronesian Area Research Center at the University of Guam. Dates that it began was 2019. What month did you start?
January, Senator, January this year. But I resumed my position in this time as an assistant professor, associate professor, and now as a director of research in collaboration with Dean Monique Story.
And how long is your contract at the University of Guam?
I'm on a tenure track, and it's going to be, the contract is to be renewed on a yearly basis.
A yearly basis, okay. And do you have any plans on renewing your contract so that you're here a lot longer? Because I believe the the term of your position is a 3-year term? Oh, I'm sorry, 5-year term.
Yes, certainly. It's my intention to remain for a longer period of time and to continue the work both at Mark in the promotion of the engagement of the Micronesian Area Research Center with the different cultural initiatives taking place in Guam and in the rest of Micronesia. So, Senator, answering your question, indeed, my intention is to stay on a long period of time.
Okay, that's good to know. We'd hate to have you get started on something and then leave it, you know. For Lucia, she has so much work on her plate right now, so appreciate that. Secondly, you were here earlier in 2013 to 2014, and that was only for 1 year, and then you left Guam and went back to Manila?
Yes, I took over the position of Director of Instituto Cervantes. It's a non-for-profit network of cultural centers of the Spanish government around the world. Once my term was over, and considering that the position had opened at Mark, I applied and I got the position that I'm serving right now.
Okay. So, what are some of your plans for Hagåtña restoration as far as something that you can implement right away? I know, like I said, funding is very difficult to put those projects together. So what is something that you plan on bringing to the table that can be implemented right away?
Thank you for the question. Indeed, one of the plans that, as you mentioned, Senator, that I could put on the table would be the idea that the restoration and the redevelopment of Hagåtña is not bound, it cannot take place in a matter of 1, 2, 3, or 4 years. But we are here on a long historical process in which different administrations, and most particularly this current administration, it's fully committed. So the idea that this goes beyond any partisan or political standing in particular, I think that someone, an outsider like me, is something that can certainly remind or bring to the forefront on every occasion. At the same time, the idea that there is that Hagåtña had a unique set of identities, and all of those identities can play a role and purposes. No, as I mentioned in my presentation, the idea that Hagåtña is a capital, but at the same time it has to be a place of living, a walkable city, an eye candy opportunity for not only for our visitors but for our neighbors, for our residents. And at the same time, a city that doesn't date only from colonial times, neither from the U.S. Navy, nor from the Spanish times, but it, as Ms. Rita Nauta has mentioned, dates back not only hundreds of years, but thousands of years. In that sense, the opportunities that I had in the past of nominating the Lati stones, the Lati set of the Angel Santos Park for the National Registry, and in collaboration with Senator Marsh Taitano, the nomination of the Old District Court, it represents those two of those multiple layers that Hagåtña has in their visual manifestations of the city as a heritage site. That the possibility of keeping that balance between those layers of identities and those layers of visual representations of our history, I think that's one of the assets that I can bring to the table. At the same time, the experience of seeing it happening in a nearby location that shares a lot of ties with Guam, such as the Philippines. In Manila, in different town centers, I had had the opportunity to collaborate with the municipal authorities, with government authorities up to this day, and seeing how the many challenges that funding, as Senator you have mentioned, it's one of them, probably the most important, and seeing happening and seeing the community get together with the different stakeholders to make it happen. that brings, I want to believe, a little bit of know-how in this challenging task that we have ahead of us.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Madrid, for that. And I guess the last thing I would like to ask is how active will you be on finding funding to fund this project at Hagan? Is there anything in Spain that allows funding for something like this that you can go after or research that we can find some money there in Spain?
I believe so, yes. There's a number of grant programs that open the possibility for us to apply for those. And Guam and the Chamorro culture has a lot of sympathies in Spain. There is a simple online search will reveal many online communities that are actively engaging with the heritage of Guam and the Mariana Islands. There's a number of government initiatives, and I'm referring Spanish government initiatives. One of them that is, again, very close by in Manila, it's a foundation that is called Escuela Taller that provides training, and it's a non-for-profit foundation that allows the restoration of stone and wood buildings in order to make them sustainable in our contemporary needs, but keeping the standards of historical buildings. In that sense, Guam perfectly applies to the scope of action. The Ganya Restoration and Redevelopment Authority fully falls within the scope of this foundation, and exploring those venues, that's something that I'm very much willing to put on the table. We have to explore the right channels to develop this because of the unique political status of Guam, to find the right way to channel it. But certainly it can be done, and in fact, I'm already working on initiatives that can provide funding to different endeavors.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for that, because that is a really big concern right now. And well, Dr. Madrid, I thank you so much for stepping up to the plate and putting all your energy and effort and knowledge into Hagatna Restorations Council. And if you have the support and from LACIA, then you definitely have my support as well. And I thank you so much.
Senator, thank you very much for your kind words, and I'm looking forward to put the little service that I can provide on the table for this task. Sejus Masi.
Sejus Masi, Senator Taitano, I think those were a very good set of questions, and they provided a lot of very good information for us to all be contemplating. It was really important to be hearing about that kind of potential that you are bringing with us, that you understand the Spanish cultural landscape, understand how grants operate there or what grants might be available and those sort of things. So I think that could be a very important opportunity for us, as well as just bringing in some of those experiences that you were a part of in Manila that does have some shared history in colonial times and also perhaps in indigenous times. And so you can bring some of the experiences of how they have tackled both their indigenous identity as well as balancing that with their different historical eras and their modern era, how they have funded it, how they have expertise that might be able to be brought over here, or work with us in some way if we are planning on restoring or rehabilitating or something else with some of these historic type of structures that are part of our landscape or used to be part of our landscape. So again, all of that was good to hear. So I have a few questions myself. One of them is, do you at this point foresee any conflicts of interest between the work that you do and sitting on the Board of Commissioners for the Hagatna Restoration and Redevelopment Authority?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Not really. I think, on the contrary, there is an alignment of interests in the sense that for the Micronesian Area Research Center in general, the advocacy for cultural industries, cultural tourism, and preservation of tangible and intangible heritage, it's part of a mandate. I don't have any private businesses neither in Guam nor elsewhere. So rather than any conflict, what I see is an alignment of scopes of action and expertise.
One of the things that came to mind as you were speaking is, as director of the research center and having worked with UOG in the past, you have participated in that historical research for some of the buildings and our indigenous culture, such as the Senator Angel Santos Laddie Park, the Laddie that are there. So if an opportunity comes up where there is that kind of research for payment, how would you proceed with balancing those interests of serving on the board and balancing those roles as a researcher?
Well, I mean, as director of research of Mark, and associate professor, my role it's to conduct research and scholarly writing and teaching in some of the subjects that are being taught, some of the courses at the university. Further payment for any research project is not part of my scope, because it's already being taken care of by the university itself, by Mark itself. So further payment or hiring will not be necessary. In that sense, it can actually serve as a saving for the redevelopment authority, Restoration and Redevelopment Authority. No, I try to see any potential conflict in that sense, but I cannot figure it out. Precisely because of that, like my role as a researcher is already paid, so no foreseeable conflict on that line.
That's good to hear, and I do like hearing that we might be able to have some very specific research being conducted by yourself or through Mark that could be benefiting the work that we're doing in the Hagåtña Restoration and Redevelopment Authority, that's going to benefit the community overall. So that's a good point to bring up, I think. You've mentioned some of the strengths of what you bring to the commission. Is there anything else you want to add to that before I get to my next question?
Not at this point. I think with my expertise, my previous experience with similar instances are, I think, what that was my, if I may say, my stronger asset on this endeavor. Mark has already an ex officio seat on the Hagåtña Redevelopment and Restoration Authority, and so it's already being represented. It's in my capacity of a person with some kind of previous experience in similar instances is, I think, what represents my stronger asset.
Very good to hear. And I think overall we've heard quite a few strengths that you're bringing. And I just want to point out in your testimony, in a sense, I think it was very modest. So I just want to point out for those that are not having access to the packet that was submitted that, yes, you are currently a director of research and at the Micronesian Area Research Center, which is a premier research facility throughout the world. We are one of the very few that specialize in Micronesian research. You are specifically a Spanish Pacific historian. You've been researching and writing, as Ms. Nauta was pointing out, within the Marianas, within the Philippines, which was connected with the Marianas during the Spanish colonial era, and then also throughout Micronesia for many, many years now. When you were in the Philippines, you were director of the Instituto Cervantes de Manila, which was a very large position. And you have served as an associate professor at the university in the past. You have worked with the Ministry of Culture in Spain, and so forth. So I think that speaks very highly of many things that you're bringing. And again, you've mentioned this, but I just want to give you the opportunity to see if you have any further statements on it. So when you were speaking earlier, you were noting that there are these many layers of history. Hagåtña does have many layers of significant history. It is also formally designated both locally and nationally as a historic district. That historic district rests upon certain contributing structures, on certain cultural lifeways that were deemed significant, and significant events and eras. Guahan is also a homeland for the indigenous Chamorro people and has been for somewhere between perhaps 3,500 to 4,000 years or maybe even longer. So as a historian, in what ways do you envision supporting and ensuring the expression of these different but yet each significant layers of Hagåtña? So again, you've spoken on it a little bit before, but perhaps if you could elaborate on some perhaps specific thoughts you have about ensuring and supporting the expression of those different layers?
Yes, thank you, Senator, for the question. Indeed, that's certainly one of the any task that has to do with identity. It's a delicate one, and it's also subject of the will of the contemporary generations that are living it. So eventually, that balance will be determined by the existing generations that will live through our time and the generations to come, and contributing to keep those balances in place imply that, for example, the relevant layers that came into history through the indigenous Chamorro people that first inhabited the island of Guam imply that proper credit is given, a proper preeminence is given to that earlier foundation of the identity of Hagåtña as a city. If I may, for example, if we were to say, well, there has to be a monument to or a street name. I'm putting a fictional case, no? A monument or a street name for someone in Hagåtña. We'll have to say, well, there are many people, no? In a history in a city that has many centuries of history, you could choose many people, but one of them will have to be Chief Kipuja, for example, or who has been identified in early records as the prominent chief, one of the a primus inter pares of the indigenous chiefs of the Mariana Islands, and being a place with unique geographical features that makes it. We can speculate with the idea that Hagåtña was certainly, maybe capital is not the right term, but a prominent place for the indigenous people for hundreds of years before of the colonization, implies that there is a clear foundation for that identity that, yes, contemporary generations may choose otherwise, but when we conceive what Hagåtña is going to be and how it's going to be represented, that foundation has to be clearly represented and being visible. It cannot overtake the rest of the rich history of the city, and at the same time, it cannot be forgotten or left behind as something belonging to a remote past. Now, how these identities are represented, it doesn't mean that there has to be, I mentioned monuments or street names, but it can also be architectural features or design in the urban furniture that will make our sidewalks or streets walkable or pedestrian friendly. And there are nuances that allow us to represent that rich heritage and the relevance of these different layers in its proper hierarchical order. It's certainly, for example, it's coming back to mind the architectural style of the old district court from the U.S. From American style in the 1950s. It's valuable, and it has to be acknowledged and respected, and at the same time we can or the Lujan House, currently used by and restored by the Guam Preservation Trust. They have different features belonging to different parts of our history, but we have to allow each of those layers to take proper. None of them can take over the other one. It has to be a true representation of what Hagaña was at the time of its destruction. That was in World War II. How to keep that balance and how to make sure that ancient past it's truly represented. It's a challenge that, as I mentioned, we cannot let each of those challenges overtake the rest of the challenges. We are not redeveloping a museum. It has to be a capital that we have to have a certain sense of pragmatism. That has to be both a capital, has to attract tourism, it has to be user-friendly, it has to be inhabited, and it has to be affordable for the people of Guam and the Mariana Islands. In that sense, as I mentioned, the right balance, it has to be found, and all the priorities have to be taken into consideration. I hope I answer your question. I'm elaborating a little bit long on this, but because there are many sensitivities to take into account. I hope I address your main point.
Yes, definitely. And, you know, I think what comes across very clearly is that you are very thoughtful about this. You've been thinking about some of these issues for a very long time. And I think your experience and expertise in these sorts of areas of cultural heritage tourism, those sorts of parts of your background come through, and that we know that along with the rest of the board, along with the executive director and staff, that people are going to be thinking about all of these issues and really trying to represent each one well and to its appropriate measures. So I find that very important and appreciate that you bring that to the table. So with that, I don't believe I have any other questions. We seem to be good here. I will move on to the next of our nominations, and I just want to remind people that the public hearing that we were going to have for Ms. Patricia Ann P. Atta has had to be rescheduled because she is traveling right now and she was not able to find a suitable internet connection to be able to testify at this particular time. Next we have so with that, next we have the confirmation hearing of Mr. Eduardo J. Calvo to serve on the Board of Commissioners for the Hagaña Restoration and Redevelopment Authority. We have several people here that are here to provide testimony. We have Mr. Richard Dueñas, who is providing oral testimony, if you could go ahead and come forward. We have Mr. Calvo, who we'll be listening to, and then we have the Executive Director of the Hagåtña Restoration and Redevelopment Authority, Ms. Lacia Casil, who is also here to provide written testimony and oral testimony as well. So with this being a physically present confirmation hearing, we'll go ahead and hear from your supporters, and then we'll save your testimony for last, Mr. Calvo. So if we could begin with Mr. Ricardo Dueñas, and if you could begin your testimony with stating your name. Si Diyos Masi.
Thank you. Buenas and half a day, Madam Chair, Senator Taitano. My name is Ricardo Dueñas, and I am here this morning to provide testimony in support of Eduardo Jake Calvo to serve as on the Board of Commissioners for the Hagåtña Restoration and Redevelopment Authority. I've known Jake practically my whole life. I'm older than him, so I can say I've known him his whole life. We have familial ties together. And I have always known Jake to be an intelligent, fair, and open-minded individual. Now, granted, he's not an historian, but he is an accomplished businessman, and I believe the skills he brings to the commission as a businessman will serve in moving forward with the goals of the authority. From a personal perspective, I think Jake has a history and a love and affinity for the village of Hagåtña. And that affinity is born from his personal history, not just himself, but also his family. His family have been longtime residents of Hagåtña, dating back to the late Spanish, the pre-war, and the post-war eras. Personally, Jake, I know Jake, like myself, attended the Cathedral Grade School here in Hagåtña. His family have been longtime parishioners of the Hagåtña Cathedral. And so I know from my experience, Jake spent a lot of time in Hagåtña, growing up, climbing the trees of the Plaza de Susana along with my brother, and roaming the streets as he waited for his father to get off work in his office here, being here in Hagåtña. So I think Jake provides a unique perspective as a longtime resident of Hagåtña that, although may not be as a professional historian, brings the personal and familial connection with the island, with Hagåtña, and I think those skills will be useful when we move forward with the goals of the authority. And I believe that Jake will serve as a very valuable member of the commission. Thank you very much.
Si Diyos Masi, for your testimony and for taking the time to come here today. And you bring forward a very good point. If we had a board that was only comprised of, let's say, historians, it would be a very one-dimensional board. So what we're looking for ideally is a board that's comprised of engineering skills, planning skills, architectural skills, cultural heritage skills, historian. And so I think in that way, all together, we are bringing all of those perspectives, all of that expertise together to best figure out the way forward and the best way to be considering as many important aspects as possible. Certainly the familial connections are important, as is, having that continued connection with Hagåtña, and business skills are important, as has been brought up earlier. Finding funding. We do hope that or are planning to revitalize Hagåtña in a way that it's going to be a business district along with a living district as well. And so those kind of considerations, I think, have their role within the board. So with that, we also have Ms. Lacia Casil. If you can go ahead and begin your testimony as well.
Half a day. Again, thank you. And for the record, again, my name is Lacia Casil. I'm the Executive Director of the Hagåtña Restoration and Redevelopment Authority. And I'm here to testify in support of Mr. Jake Calvo to our Board of Commissioners. I don't know Jake personally. I've only met him a couple of times. But I do know that he has a very strong background in business administration and has been a part of one of the anchoring, as the gentleman stated before, businesses and families here in Hagatna that has helped build up and create our capital city. I was looking through his nomination packet, and something that really stood out to me was his focus on compliance, in his background. And we had just talked about that before. So I was thinking, looking at our board, and you just stated it yourself, was how will this, what strength this will bring to our board, of a well-rounded board. We have a historian, we have a business owner, we have residents, Ms. Franquez, who has lived in Hagatna pre-war, post-war, and compliance is definitely something that we're going to need with all of the 31 possible projects, and all the moving parts that comprise this entire huge effort. We're going to need, that detailed of keeping projects in line. And I think that's one of the strengths that Mr. Calvo has, looking at his packet. And I know that our governor has faith and confidence in him. I've spoken with her about this. So yes, I do hope that you will consider Mr. Calvo for the board. Thank you.
Suzuis Maasi, for your testimony and for bringing out some of his strengths, such as perhaps having that very detail-oriented perspective, which does make a lot of sense if we're going to have a large number of projects occurring, and they're going to be occurring for a long period of time. We definitely need very detail-oriented people, I would say. So with that, let's go ahead and hear from Mr. Calvo himself.
Sisus Maasi. Buenas and Hafade, Chairwoman and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on my nomination to serve as a board member on the Hagatna Restoration and Redevelopment Authority Board of Commissioners. It's an honor and privilege to be considered. Living on Guam, we all know Hagatna as our capital. It is the home of our seat of government, judiciary, and spiritual past. Historic photos show Hagatna as a vibrant and populous village, the center of our island's social, civic, business, and government activities. Hagatna means much more to me. My family's connection to Hagatna spans many generations. My grandparents, Eduardo Torres Jake Calvo and Veronica McDonald Calvo, were residents of Hagatna prior to World War II and even before they were married. My father and his brothers spent much of their youth in Hagatna, according to precious old photos and stories my grandmother would tell. When my grandfather first started his insurance business, he did so from his home in Hagatna, behind the current Hagatna Police Precinct. Later, he relocated Calvo's insurance offices across the current Bank of Guam building. Calvo's Insurance is still headquartered in Hagatna on the entrance of Chalan Santo Papa Street. Calvo Enterprises Incorporated is just walking distance down Martyr Street. I understand Hagatna as the original home to our heritage and even the gateway to our future. The HRRA has done great work to revitalize Hagatna the right way, and I'm honored to have the opportunity to join the HRRA to help continue that work. Visiting different capital cities over the years impacted my perspective of those countries in a profound way. Witnessing the development in Manila from the 70s to now has been awe-inspiring. From Malacañang Palace to Rizal Park to Salcedo Market, a special energy unique to Manila abounds here. Experiencing Tokyo through the years, both as a tourist and a resident, expanded my perspective on how a modern society maintains its cultural identity. Both these capitals, for me, represent a great balance of modernization and cultural tradition. The recent developments of the Guam Museum, and the Guam Congress Building in Hagåtña are proof that Guam's capital is thriving while seeking to maintain a similar balance of the modern and the traditional. The Hagåtña Master Plan is a timely idea for our island's capital. The restoration and development of Hagåtña stands to benefit our community as a whole. It would be an honor to work in tandem with our fellow stakeholders in the island's business community to continue the mission of the Hagåtña Restoration and Redevelopment Authority to revitalize, promote, preserve, and protect the heritage and economic vitality of the city of Hagåtña. Si Diyos Masi for the opportunity to testify.
Sejus Masi for everybody here for testifying, and it's very good to hear your testimony. Part of what stood out to me is and I think it's because I've had similar experiences in visiting other capitals. It opens up your eyes to different possibilities, and I do think that's important to be very grounded in home, but to also see different ways that these different areas are tackling some of those same issues. How do we move forward with development, modernization, but balancing that with tradition and all of those special things that have made that place a home or something special to people for so long. So with that, I will turn this over to Senator Taitano for her comments and questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Madam Chair, I've known Jake for quite some time. Unlike Dr. Madrid, where my questions were extensive because I didn't know very much about him, I do know Jake. And I've definitely has my support. I wanted to be here today to also include some of the nice things that Mr. Duenas had said. There's so much more to this guy. He's an artist, number one. And that kind of experience can bring so much to Hagåtña. In fact, I think, Jake, you still play music in Hagåtña. You decided to keep your gigging here in Hagåtña instead of Tumon, and I'm so glad you did. You know, there's not a lot of music down in this area, and you're keeping that alive. So that perspective, you know, music does so much to a community, and it brings people together. It fills your heart with joy and great ideas and being positive. So you're going to bring that to the board, you know, your experience with music. But most especially, you know, the one thing that's important is your love for Hagåtña. That speaks bounds. I mean, that goes beyond any experience anybody has or what they bring to the table, your love for Hagåtña. It's truly there. I also know that you're a very, very honest person, like Mr. Duenas said too, and very compassionate. So I have total confidence knowing that somebody on this board is going to be there with all those attributes. It's so important. And as I mentioned to Dr. Madrid, the concern of funding. Well, if anybody knows business, it's you, Jake. You know, you can bring a lot. I mean, Lacia, this guy can move mountains, you know, and it's not just his influence in the business community, but his compassion and his personality. You know, I would write a check for you, Jake, anytime if you came up to me. You have that way of influencing people and in a good way, too. You know, Madam Chair, I commend the governor for making such a great choice to sit on this board because I have a interest, and I've always had an interest in Hagåtña restoration from the very beginning when I was actually part of the implementation of the plan, or the creating of the plan, as I mentioned with you, Lacia. So, Jake, you have my full support, and I ask my colleagues to do the same as well. Thank you so much for stepping up to the plate, because I know you've got a lot on your plate, and to do this to our advantage. Thank you. To Guam's advantage.
Senator.
Thank you.
So I have just a few questions. We'll go ahead with the question that I had asked previously. You are a business owner. I saw that in your resume, and it's been spoken about. Do you foresee any conflicts of interest, and if so, how do you plan to approach those?
Thank you for that question, Senator. I don't foresee any business conflicts, not with the businesses that I personally have interest in.
I did like hearing, or I do think it's an important thing for the Board of Commissioners. I hadn't realized that you are a musician, but I agree with the previous, apparently a very good one, and I agree with the previous senator that that's an important attribute to bring. With this revitalization of Hagåtña, we're looking for it to be this place that is engaging to our locals, it's engaging to tourists, it needs to be vibrant, it needs to be active. We want people to be coming here often, we want them to be having these excellent experiences, and we need that creativity in the way that we're approaching architecture, the development of the park areas, all the different places that we can be expressing it and be putting that creative eye to it. So I think that's a very important skill that you bring. One of the things that we're seeing now is how these murals are going up in Hagåtña, and it really changes the ambiance of what Hagåtña feels like. Amongst other things that are happening, food trucks and other things, I think that these are all very important to creating the kind of energy that this plan is looking to continue to build on. So that was very good to hear. And your business acumen will be bringing strengths as well. Now, the next question that I have, and I'm going to apologize for it ahead of time because I have some lengthy exposition, and then I finally get to the question. So I apologize for the lengthy exposition.
No apologies necessary.
Our community needs commission members who understand and know how to, or are willing to, appropriately listen to and respond to data about our society, culture, and environment, and the relevant issues associated. Our community also needs a commission that understands and knows how to address just the realities of our landscape. That we have a new administration with its own vision of how to develop for the future. We have new directors of our government agencies who are bringing with them perhaps different expertise and sets of experiences. And that there is this rapidly changing face of how government agencies are to incorporate issues that we're all getting to better understand, like climate change and sea level rise, and the negative impacts that our environments, societies, and indigenous cultures, and the negative impacts on our environment, societies, and indigenous cultures if we don't change the way that we develop and interact with our community assets. So, and I'm going to throw in a few examples here. For example, Guam Waterworks Authority is investing perhaps hundreds of millions of dollars into updating its Hagåtña sewage treatment plan. Just a few miles away, we are having the Port Authority renovate the hotel wharf to accommodate the cruise ship industry. And the Coastal Zone Management Program has discussed severe issues with the concept of building a cruise ship port in Hagåtña owing to unacceptable environmental impacts and conditions. However, at the same time, we are all interested in moving forward and making things happen in Hagåtña. We've been planning this a long time. We all definitely want to move things forward. So thus, the Hagåtña Restoration and Redevelopment Authority needs a board of commissioners who pay real attention to these types of data and these changing regulatory and other developments. So finally, the question. Do you see yourself as someone who will appropriately listen to and respond to such data and issues and work to resolve them? And then if you could explain perhaps the ways that you foresee being able to deal with those changing situations over time, like new understandings about our environment, new understandings about ways to, as a government agency, to deal with environmental and other issues?
Thank you for that question. Yes, I would definitely respond, but I would also like to defer to the group as well, that we, it wouldn't be me personally responding. I would consult with the rest of the committee members, and pool our resources, and defer to the experts as well, because obviously I'm not. My area of expertise is not in environmental issues.
That's a very reassuring answer, I feel. Experts are experts in their different areas for a reason. It's always good to have a critical eye, even with experts. And taking into consideration the group, that I think is also important. But you also speak to a skill which can be very important in issues like this, because this is a long-term plan. It's going to take perhaps 20, 30 years to implement. Perhaps we'll never finish its work in a sense, because we'll always be wanting to modernize and develop and rethink things. I mean, that's just how society operates. And so paying attention to those things is important, because we do want to move forward, and we just need to work together, problem solve, figure out the best path forward, and then make it happen, right? So I have one fortunately shorter question, much less lengthy exposition beforehand. Assuming that the plan is adopted, what is your vision for how it will be implemented over the next 20 years, given that, as we just discussed, things are going to change over time? So do you have any recommendations on a formal mechanism for periodic review of the plan and its implementation by agencies outside of the Hagåtña Restoration and Redevelopment Authority? So just focusing on any thoughts on a formal mechanism for periodic review of the plan and its implementation?
Okay, thank you again for that question, Senator. I would simply just focus on what can be done now, what is realistic now. For example, be it a building where there's property that the government already owns in Hagåtña, if development can be started on that. Let's work on what's on the here and now.
Sujus Masi for answering that. And I think going back to your earlier answer where you were saying that you are open to listening to experts, maybe even as a commission member, calling for experts to weigh in or provide their perspective in any time that you feel that it's important to do so. I think that those are going to be important. And we do want to move forward. So a certain amount of what we're doing does have to be in the now.
Yes.
And then maybe it's more so for us policymakers to be thinking about that periodic review and how to ensure that that happens, so everything is staying current and people are like within the Board of Commissioners, able to focus on the now, while those of us up here maybe are the ones who are just making sure that everything is staying current and all the agencies are working together and it stays on track in the best way possible for all of us in the community. So, are there any further comments or questions? So again, Sedzus Maasi, everyone, for your testimony and for taking the time this morning. It's been very important and very enlightening to hear from everyone. So if there's not yet, if there are not any others that wish to testify, the confirmation hearing of both Mr. Carlos Madrid and Mr. Eduardo Calvo to serve on the Board of Commissioners for the Hagåtña Restoration and Redevelopment Authority is now completed. And the committee, I want to remind the public that the committee will be continuing to receive testimonies for the next few days. Please address your written testimony to the Committee on Heritage and the Arts, Parks, Guam Products, Hagåtña Revitalization, Self-Determination, and Regional Affairs, and submit them via email to Office of Senator Kelly Marsh Taitano. So the email address would be office.senatorkelly@guamlegislature.org, or you can provide a physical copy to my office, which is located at the second floor of the Guam Congress Building, 163 Chalan Santo Papa, Hagåtña, Guam, 96910 if you're planning on mailing it in. And that will conclude our public hearing. It is now 11:20.